Hello and welcome to a new episode of Another History of the World. Today we're going to be talking about women in Al-Andalus. The history of the social inequality of women has been studied extensively by focusing on asymmetrical power imbalances, the role played by culture, and institutionalized and systemic patriarchy. But often when we read between the lines of particular historical contexts, we can find incredible internal diversity. This can be difficult to define, but today we're going to look at Al-Andalus. Al-Andalus was the Muslim-ruled area of the Iberian Peninsula, what is now Portugal, Spain, and a little bit of present-day southern France. This period of Islamic rule lasted from 711 till 1492, and the first half of this period in particular is sometimes called the Golden Age of Jewish culture in Spain. It was a time and place where Jews, Muslims, and Christians all coexisted, with some violent exceptions, but it enabled a flourishing of literature and the arts in particular. Under Muslim rule, Jews and Christians were considered dhimmi, or a protected class, since in the Quran, the Jews and Christians were called al-Kitab, or people of the book. And it was not only men. Despite historical prejudices, the women of Al-Andalus formed a significant part of the intellectual symbiosis. Some reached positions in public office, in law, religion, patronage of the arts, and in science, and they filled both public and private spaces, and some had greater influence by virtue of their positions as royal women. The study of women in Al-Andalus is lacking, but we do know that women performed various activities in the world of knowledge, and we can glean from their relationship with the society in which they lived. The women of Al-Andalus have traditionally been regarded as having more freedom than Muslim women from other places in the Arab and Islamic world, but it's clear that inequality existed between free women and slaves, which reflects the differentiated roles that they played in the society of Al-Andalus. Imazigan women, for instance, also distinguished themselves from other women of Al-Andalus. Although we traditionally assumed that women's presence was relegated to inside the home, women were essential to everyday life in cities, running mosques, cemeteries, and water fountains. The preservation of objects, personal adornment, and female funerary epigraphs also tell us a lot about women's lives. Women were artists, and some were musicians, others were poets. Poetry was the highest form of public discourse in Al-Andalus. Generally speaking, medieval Arab sources preserve the poetic activity of women in a greater amount than other cultures in the same time and place. But the literary history that has been passed down to us about works by women is nearly insignificant compared with works by men. The reasons are varied, but include the model of society which impose sexual segregation that can only be done away with under very specific circumstances, and a concept of honour tied into the invisibility of women, the literary canons of the time, modelled on the basis of literary production by men, and the control over the transmission of culture. And Arabic poetry was a mainly oral tradition, and women rarely had the presence of an audience required to pass on those works. That explains why the individuals who passed on the work of women poets seem to have almost always been the male members of their families, generally the same persons who were responsible for their education. But their poetry was not publicly known, and few of their biographical details are known. Some fame, however, seems to reflect the nostalgia for a brighter past, the golden age of literature in Al-Andalus. The most notable case is that of the Umayyad princess, Wallāda bint al-Mustakfī. Daughter of one of the last caliphs of Cordoba, she was a major literary figure in Cordoba and hosted a literary circle. She was also the sometime lover of the poet Ibn Ziyād, to whom she addressed both love poems and, after they broke up, invective ones. She was also romantically involved with another woman poet, Mujah al-Qurtubiyya, who was said to be Wallāda's student. Another was the wife of Dunash ben Labrat. As the head notes to a single poem make clear, even though we don't know this poet's name, she is important for being a Jewish female poet. She composed a lament upon her husband's exile. Fatima bint al-Mutana was born in Cordoba, a philosopher, jurist and mystic who lived in the second half of the 12th century. She moved to Seville, where she devoted herself to teaching and had great influence on the mystic Ibn Arabi. In history, Anonymous is not always a man, despite our instincts and biases. Looking at differences in age, social status, married, unmarried, enslaved, free, ethnic origin, family and socio-economic position in order to locate individual women and larger patterns within historical and religious contexts can make visible the active participation of women throughout history. Although women have been largely invisible throughout history, it's not so simple.